Okay, it's 6 o'clock. We can go ahead and call the meeting to order. I do not have any agenda updates. So with that, I will ask the clerk to please call the roll. Clerk, I'm out.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fellers.
Here.
Mr. Fiducia.
Here.
Mr. Girl.
Present.
Mrs. Gorel.
Present.
Mr. Hoffman.
Present.
Mr. Kelly.
Here.
Mr. McDonald.
Here.
Mr. Westcott.
Here.
Mr. Arena.
Here.
Mr. Billich. Mr. Billich. I thought I saw that he was on. Third and final call for Mr. Billich.
He's signed in. I'm sure he'll be back with us in a second.
Okay, Mr. Booker.
Present.
Mr. Butita.
Here.
Mrs. Crosby.
Here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's 17 fully present and 1 AWOL.
Okay, thank you very much. Who are the two that are absent?
I'm just saying Mr. Billich is not currently present.
Got it. Okay. So thank you very much, Clerk Amau. With that, I will ask everybody to stay seated, and I will turn things over to Mr. Webster for the invocation and pledge. Mr. Webster.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Lord, for all of your blessings. We truly have much to be thankful for. Please place a heavy hand on all of our shoulders and guide us to make the right decisions for all of the people in Winnebago County. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag.
The United States of America, to the republic for
which it stands,
one
one
nation
under God, indivisible, liberty, and justice for all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Webster. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
With that, I will move on to our next item on the agenda. That is public comment. We have, I believe, 3 speakers signed up tonight. I do see Katie Littlefield is here. Before I turn things over to you, Katie, I have to read a little disclaimer on public speaking. Comments shall be limited to 3 minutes. Speakers may not address a zoning matter which is pending before the ZBA, zoning committee, or county board. Personnel matters or pending or threatened litigation may not be addressed in open session. An individual may speak a maximum of 3 times per calendar year on the same topic. This prohibition shall include the repetition of the same topic in a statement of what is purported to be a different topic. Personal attacks or inappropriate language of any sort will not be tolerated. Katie, thank you very much for being here. You are joining us this evening to talk about the amendment regarding the health department ordinance. And I'll turn things over to you, and you got 3 minutes. Go ahead.
Oh, good. I typed this up or read it so I could be clear. And some of these things I understand about and some of them I don't. So I know we will not be engaging in a conversation about that, but these are some things that I'm concerned about and want to take some time to just share with you. So my name's Katie Littlefield. I'm a lifelong resident of Winnebago County. I'm a school board president. I'm a mom of 4, love our community. And this ordinance that amending chapter 50 related to the restaurants, which is being laid over. It sounds like, I don't think it got pulled from the agenda. It sounds like it has a lot of confusion wrapped around it, some things that I don't understand. And I spoke with several board members. I got several different answers. So with that being said, here are some concerns that I am not confused about, wrapped in with some that I am. So 1, I'm a small business owner for 15 years. I sell an exclusive line of women's clothing privately, and my business, like hundreds of others in our community, has taken a huge hit. I'm off by over 30%, and that's getting off easy. There are others that are 90% off, and I know you know these stories. It is interesting to me that some of the elected officials that don't want to open are, they're getting a full paycheck and working from home. So there is no sense of urgency. And that's concerning. Number two, the idea that us in the community are viewing on this ordinance you would give unilateral decision-making power over to the health department on restaurant and small business closures and openings, I feel is showing a lack of leadership. I'll not sit here and claim to understand fully how this works, but if there would be any hint of abdicating your authority concerning this area, I believe the public ought to know before you do such a thing, because are you not the governing body that represents the people and businesses in this county? And have you ever given this amount of authority over to any other department? I have heard that has not happened. Now, if you give that authority up, if that's exactly what is happening or could potentially happen, who do we go to? As you know, the county health department board is appointed. They're insulated, much harder to put pressure on, and a division of power we all know is a very good thing. No, so number three, I'm not as concerned as much about right now as I am for this second wave. Will we have complete shutdown again? We don't know. Will businesses be able to survive a second round of this? I hope you are asking yourselves these questions. And I realize we have to look at the health of our community, but we cannot overlook that. We cannot overlook our economy at the complete expense of that. So, and it is interesting to me, based on conversation, that the health department seems to be advocating somewhat for this right now. And isn't it health departments in tandem with county boards to make these decisions? And isn't it county boards that are the ones that have decided to open up their counties in defiance of the governor's orders? So I'm a little confused on or wondering about why the health department would ask and request this right now. And it's my perception, along with many others in the community, that the health department would be choosing winners and losers in our business community. And that's simply not fair. So my question, who is really advocating and asking, who's asking for this and advocating for this change, and why are they doing this? And I wasn't able to get a very clear answer on that. And
Okay, Katie, we're at 3 minutes, and I want to thank you very much for addressing the board this evening. I have to stop you at 3 minutes because if I let you go forward a little bit, then I got to let everybody else, and then I get into trouble. So I apologize, but really appreciate you joining us this evening for the discussion. With that, we do have another speaker. We'll see is Lucy Parsons here? Lucy, have you joined us? I do not hear Lucy. Is Andrea Sanderson here? Mrs. Sanderson, are you here, or Mrs. Parsons?
Andrea's here.
Andrea, oh, okay, thank you for joining us. And I'm gonna go ahead and reset my clock here. Ma'am, you have 3 minutes. Andrea, I believe you're talking about recent actions by the Sheriff's Department. And I just want to note for Clerk Gummow, I see Mr. Billick has joined us. But Andrea, you're up, and I believe you're addressing recent actions by the Sheriff's Department. You got 3 minutes, ma'am.
That's correct.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I won't waste any time here. There are some concerns that we have. I've been participating in some of the activism that's been happening around the county. First is Deputy Matthew Jarvis was collecting information and gathering intel on protesters at the sit-in Saturday or Sunday nights at the jail. We confronted this deputy and asked if there was a problem, if there was a crime being committed that was drawing him to gather intel on the protesters' vehicles. He told us at the first, he shrugged. We asked a second time and pressed if this was something that was, if there was a crime being committed and he needed to document information. He did state, no crime is being committed. We understand your piece now, but if that changes, we have it on hand. I feel gross misapplication of his power as an officer, and I don't believe that his gathering of intel prior to a crime being committed would constitute as legal. We also believe that this is harassment of the protesters, and we would ask that this behavior be addressed immediately. Second, same Deputy Matthew Jarvis was later seen videotaping using his personal cell phone. We understand that this is not allowed while an officer is in uniform and on the job to be collecting information on their personal device, including pictures and video of the protesters and their faces while they were present. We find this to be another gross misapplication of someone's power and authority, and request this information be looked into. We do have video to evidence of this occurring. We have collected both of both incidences, and we would be happy to provide those to the board if they so choose. Third, I would like to ask if it's customary for private citizens to be able to call upon the protection of our city, of our county's taxpayer funded organization to protect their private establishment, or if that's something that's a special treatment reserved only for people who have family on board on the county board, or if that's related to the amount of money that Mr. Village donates to the sheriff's funds every year. The last thing I would like to call for is relating to Aaron Booker. Aaron Booker, board member. We've recently observed some of his behavior on social media, where he is broadly applying false applications of the law, using his past experience as a law enforcement officer to encourage individuals to use pepper spray if they are being yelled at, to run over protesters if they are near their vehicle and touching their vehicle, and that they have the right to do these things, inciting violence and encouraging this among other individuals, as well as naming private protests, peaceful protests, mob action. All of this is documented. We have screenshots of this as well. We find this to be extremely disturbing, given that this individual is a county board member and beholden to our county's actions. And we don't believe that he should remain on the board. We call for his immediate resignation.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andrea. I have to stop you at the 3-minute mark as well. Want to say thank you for sharing your thoughts this evening, but we are at that 3-minute mark, and we'll move on to see if Lucy Parsons has joined us. I do not hear or see Lucy has joined us, so then we would move on to our next item of business, which would be board member correspondence. Any board members have any comments this evening? I see the first hand up is Mr. Butita. Mr. Butita, you have the floor, sir.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Frank Manzullo has asked me to announce again that the Keep Northern Illinois Beautiful organization is going to sponsor the Great American Cleanup June 20th. This was originally scheduled for the last weekend in April, but was canceled because of the COVID situation. So for those people interested in participating in this cleanup on June 20th, they just need to go to the their website, which is knib.org, and go to Great American Cleanup, and there's a page to register that on. So if anybody's got any interest in that, and we hope you do, please follow up on that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Any other comments by board members? Mr. McDonald, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On tonight's agenda, the District 4 appointment is up. The Republican caucus's nominee did not pass last time we met. Out of respect for the Winnebago County Central Committee, I request that you bring Mike Zintek's name up tonight.
Thank you very much, Mr. McDonald. Any other comments by board members? I do not see any or hear any board members who want to speak, so we'll move on to our next item of business, Chairman's report. Today, just a heads up, I'll be following up with folks. Today, I've been asked over the course of the last few weeks, obviously there's been a great deal of discussion in our country and locally about change reforms, things we can do to do better as a county, that type of thing. And I continue to be asked those, as I'm sure you do as well. I shared, I guess, my thoughts. I want to be very clear with the board that they are just my thoughts. I understand you may have many of your own. I'm very game to talk about any ideas or concepts or go forward things that you think there might be some synergy on. But I did send out to the board today a list of maybe 9 different things. It is worth a look. Some of them are not new. The last thing is actually not necessarily a to-do item. It's actually some really good things that we have done or public safety has done the last year. The first 8 focus more on potential changes. So take a look. You won't offend me with disagreement or with other or better ideas, but I'm certainly game to talk anytime and appreciate you considering that. That's all I had for this evening, and I'll move on to announcements and communications. Clerk Demau.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The items below were received as correspondence.
And we'll go ahead and place those on file. Thank you very much, Clerk Demau. Next item of business, before we get to the administrator's update from Steve, I got the consent agenda. We do not have a raffle report tonight. We do have the approval of the April 23rd minutes and the layover the May 14th and 28th minutes, as well as the May 20th special board meeting minutes. May I please have a motion on the consent agenda? Thank you, Mr. Gurl, on the motion and Mrs. Crosby on the second. Are there any discussion on the consent agenda this evening? Seeing and hearing none, are there any board members who are opposed to this motion? I do not see any opposition, so I will ask the clerk to cast a yes vote for all of our members present. Thank you very much. Next item of business, County Administrator's Report. Steve, are you there?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I really have no report tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to our next item of business, department head updates. Do we have any department heads with any updates? I do not hear any, so we'll move on to our next item of business. We have two different action items under appointments tonight under unfinished business. One is the previously laid over appointment of Mike Shablasky to the airport board. And then second, we will deal with the the appointment of the District 4 board seat, as Mr. McDonald referenced a minute ago. But with that, the first item is the appointment of Mike Shablasky to the airport board. With that, I would entertain a motion. Mr. Kelly on a motion, Mr. Gurl on a second, Mrs. Crosby on a second. The appointment of Mike Shablasky to the airport board is now before our county board for discussion or question. Any discussion or questions by board members?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mrs. Red.
I have a comment.
Go ahead.
Several weeks ago, the executive director of the airport board called me and he asked that I vote for Mr. Shablasky. I told him I'd think about it. Now, since that discussion, a lot of stuff has gone on. I want to ask my fellow board members, some of you, I've been told, has received money from the executive director. I am going to ask that you abstain from voting tonight on that so that there won't be any more confusion. All I'm asking you to do, if you receive money in your campaign or for your campaign, please do not vote tonight on Mr. Shablasky. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Wright. Any other comments by board members? With that, I will ask Mr. Fellers. Mr. Fellers, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just in light of Ms. Red's comment, I would, could Mr. Kurlinkus please clarify our rules on abstaining from votes? Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
I believe Mr. Kurlinkus is muted.
Unmute yourself, Dave.
There we go. Thank you, Chairman. The rules of operations and procedures of the county board indicate that it's proper to abstain from a vote when someone has a financial stake, so financial interest in the matter being voted on. That's really the only time. It sets up a procedure that the person is supposed to consult with the county board chairman and the state's attorney prior to casting that abstention or requesting to be allowed to abstain. So one would have to have a financial interest in the matter being voted on.
Thank you very much, Dave. Any other questions or comments by board members? Seeing none, I will ask the clerk to cast a vote. Call the roll call. Yes.
A point of order, Mr. Chairman. I believe Mr. Hoffman had a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. I can't see Mr. Hoffman. I apologize if I missed you. Mr. Hoffman, go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to know why we are not bringing up Tommy Del Santo also for reappointment.
As I discussed with you and with Mr. McDonald and with Mrs. Red and with any other board member who's engaged me on this topic, the two items that are priority at this time are the two open seats. The one open seat is the opening of Mr. Deary leaving the airport board, and the appointment that I'm bringing forward for the board's consideration is Mike Shablasky. Mr. Del Santo is in fact a reappointment. So in the meantime, as has been the case, he is doing airport work. The work of the open position is not being done. We lost a very quality airport board member in Pat Deary. We need to replace that position as soon as possible. Similarly, the priority being with the District 4 appointment that has been open, obviously for some time now as well, and would like to take care of the open positions before we pivot and deal with potential reappointments related to people that are in seats currently.
I appreciate that, Chairman, and you and I have talked about this a lot, but I just would like to get both cases done with. Mr. Del Santo is a member of the union and a Democrat, and I would like to make, and I get the feeling sometimes he's been held over the Democrats' head to go with Mr. Shablasky. So I would appreciate if we put both on the table.
Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. Any other comments by board members?
I have one, Chairman.
Oh, Mrs. Red.
And it's just a concern. Now, if you have an executive director and he's got people on the board in his pocket voting the way he wants them to vote, I would think that that would be a conflict of interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Red. Any other comments by board members? Seeing none, I will ask the clerk to call the roll. A yes vote.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Booker is trying to get a hold of you. Mr. Booker.
Oh, Mr. Booker, go ahead. Mr. Booker. Sorry, I couldn't see. Mr. Booker, you there?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I was just want to put in my 2 cents that I'd like to vote on them separately. I'm a yes for one and a no for the other.
Yeah, well, we only have Mr. Shablasky is before the board right now. Mr. Del Santo is not before the board this evening. He is not on the agenda. The only other action item we have under appointments will be dealt with separately. We are not voting on anything else at this moment other than the Shablasky appointment, just so we're clear on the board floor. But I'm glad you asked that question, but it is only one item. It is the one board appointment. It is Mr. Shablasky in replacement of Pat Deary. Thank you, Mr. Booker, for clarifying that. Any other questions? And I apologize, I'm looking, making sure I'm not missing anybody. I don't see any other hands up. I do not believe so. Hopefully I have it right this time. I will ask the clerk to call the roll. A yes vote passes, a no vote declines. Clerk, I'm out.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fiducia.
No.
Mr. Girl.
Yes.
Mrs. Gorel. I'm sorry, Mrs. Gorel.
Yes.
I believe she said yes.
Yes.
Go ahead, Lori. Can't hear you. Lori, we cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. So
I
we
apologize. Mr. Hoffman?
Mr. Gorel was a yes for the record.
I'm sorry?
Mrs. Gorel was a yes for the record.
That is correct. Now I have Mr. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. McDonald,
Yes.
Mr. Neighbors,
No.
Mrs. Red,
No.
Mr. Salgado,
Yes.
Mr. Schultz,
No.
Mr. Tassoni,
Yes.
Mr. Webster,
No.
Mr. Westcott,
Yes.
Mr. Arena,
Yes.
Mr. Billich,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Butita,
Yes.
Mrs. Crosby,
Yes.
Mr. Fellers,
Yes.
that's 14 yes and 5 no, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Clerk Gamow. Motion passes. Mike Shablaski is appointed to the Airport Board, effective immediately. Next item of business is District 4 appointment. I've worked closely with the new Republican Caucus Chairman. At this point, I've attempted to stay in line with requests he has made. He has asked that that Mike Zintak be brought forward. So with that, I would entertain a motion to approve Mike Zintak. As motion by Mr. May I have a second, please? I have a second by Mr. Schultz. So the item is now before the board. Just to be clear, it is the District 4 appointment of the vacated seat by David Boomer. Mike Zintak is the appointee who is before the board for discussion and consideration at this time. Any questions or comments? Yes, sir, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Chairman. As I've stated before, this is a very local office. It's a district office. Normally it would be settled by an election, but in the absence of Mr. Boomer, it's always been the practice to just observe what the local people want. And these are the local activists and who they've selected. So I got to support it regardless. I know nothing about him or his politics, but I support the idea of local people having a say in a local office.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kelly. Any other comments by board members? I do not see any, but I'm looking. I want to make sure I don't miss any other hands up or comments. Seeing none, I'm going to ask the clerk to call the roll on this. A yes vote is an approval of Mr. Zintak. A no vote would decline Mr. Zintak. With that, I'll turn it over to Clerk Gamow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Girl,
Yes.
Mrs. Gorel,
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman,
Pass.
that's an abstention.
Yes.
Mr. Kelly. I'm sorry, Mr. Kelly, you need to unmute your microphone. Did anybody get that?
I'm like 100% sure it was a yes, but since we spoke to it, I think we could take him at his word. I'm getting a
Okay, that was a yes. Mr. McDonald,
No.
Mr. Neighbors,
Yes.
Mrs. Red,
Yes.
Mr. Salgado,
Yes.
Mr. Schultz,
Yes.
Mr. Tassoni,
Yes.
Mr. Webster,
Yes.
Mr. Westcott,
No.
Mr. Arena,
Yes.
Mr. Billich,
No.
Mr. Booker,
No.
Mr. Butita,
Yes.
Mrs. Crosby,
No.
Mr. Fellers,
Pass.
Mr. Fiducia.
Yes.
Okay, now I'm going to come back around. Mr. Hoffman,
No.
And again, Mr. Fellers,
No.
Mr. Chairman, that was 12 yes, 7 no.
Thank you very much, Clerk Gamal. Motion passes. Mike Zintak is appointed to the District 4 seat effective immediately. Thank you very much for your help on that. Next item of business, Finance Committee, Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have nothing to come today, but I do want to touch base on two things from our last Finance Committee. Mr. Chapman can maybe fill in a little bit about the bond sales. I want the board to know that it happened. This is for the $4 million that we approved. So Mr. Chapman can give a little bit, and then so Mr. Chapman, if you're online, if you can just talk to it when the sale of the bonds occurred, and how much savings we would save on this, and what the interest rate.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We had two bond sales, I believe it was on June 4th. And the one issue for the highway bonds, I think it was $4.2 million. That for 10 years, that rate was 1.34%. We had anticipated 2%. The other issue was for a refunding of the 2010 bonds. Again, these are 10-year bonds, and I believe the interest rate on that was 1.18%. So both of those interest rates were very good compared to what we had anticipated. We'll be closing on the bonds the first part of July, so there will be the money's available to take care of the Baxter Road project.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And then Chapman, the second item is that we discussed too was essentially looking at 2020 budget, making some potential reductions to get to that 25% policy we currently have. There's a consensus from the Finance Committee to go in that direction. I know Mr. Chapman laid out a couple items, areas that he's going to look into and talk to the departments on potential job freezes and stuff like that. And, looking at our procurement contracts to see if we can negotiate some of those contracts. So he's going to be looking and working with different departments on that to essentially see where we might end up based on the projections that we've kind of anticipated, a $6.5 million from the COVID and everything from sales receipts, stuff like that. So just want everybody to know what's going on for transparency. We're working on that. That's the direction that Mr. Chapman is kind of taking forward. But not only that, good discussions about future, how we tackle from Mr. Schultz and the team on having not just 1 year budget perspective, but multi-year, kind of looking forward, retrospect 2 to 3 years to kind of see if we can close the gap and actually increase our reserves potentially of that 25%. So we're not having just meet that threshold or potentially make a decision to stay afloat that way. So just wanted to relay that information. If you have any questions like that, please reach out to myself or Mr. Chapman. And then we'll have more information through the Finance Committee. And hopefully we'll send out information on that that's going to have an impact, obviously, not just the Finance Committee, but as a whole. So I just wanted to give that update as well, Mr. Chairman, and that concludes our report.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Salgado. Any questions for the Finance Committee? Seeing none, zoning, Mr. Webster.
Thank you, Chairman. Zoning, we have no report.
Thank you very much. Economic Development, Mr. Billick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry about that. Tonight we do have one matter of business that we discussed. That is a resolution approving annual recommendations for fiscal year 2020 host fee allocations to date. and I so to move.
Okay, we got a motion by Mr. Billick on the resolution approving annual recommendations for fiscal year 20 host fee. I got a second by Mr. Hoffman and Mrs. Crosby. Thank you. Item is now before the board. I know it's a little bit of a list. I know everybody has it. Would it be okay, Mr. Billick, if you just read them in real quickly, just the name and the amount? I know they're all regular ones we've seen a bunch of times over the years. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Give me
Thank you.
1 second. I don't have it pulled up in a moment. 1 second here. Oh, actually, that'll be on that. Actually, that'll be on my other computer. I'll actually go through them real quick. The portion of this list was actually the Baxter Road extension. I'm sorry. Sorry about that. Baxter Road extension. I do apologize having a technical malfunction. But it's the Baxter Road extension. We do also have also the Severson Dells and also the give for the Keeping Northern Illinois Beautiful again, as well as the NIU extension for the 4-H. And so a lot of these organizations that we've been given annually anyway. So we're looking to actually approve those. They did pass unanimously through the committee. And that's about it. Actually, we're spending less than last year, what we spent last year on these annual host fee gives. We do have requests for a higher amount. We did discuss that at economic development as well. And we're looking forward to actually hopefully approving more if we can, depending on obviously our budget constraints and what we have available.
Got it. Thank you. Mr. Chapman, Steve, a question. So just so we're clear, I believe you paid the IASCO. So there's two county associations we belong to. One is the large county one, IASCO. That's the one Mr. Crowley serves on the board on. That's a lot of the large metro counties in Chicago and in the suburbs. Then I do see, again, that we have UCCI, $5,000 for their council. That is a very good association as well. That tends to serve a lot of our smaller rural counties. We fit both. We got a rural piece and certainly an urban piece. So we fit in both categories. Both have served us well. Did you pay the IASCO one out of a different account, Steve?
Yes, we did, Mr. Chairman. It was budgeted elsewhere besides the host fees.
Understood. Okay. Just want to confirm we are part of the large county and the small county one, so we didn't drop that off. So thank you very much for clarifying that. Any questions by board members? I didn't mean to prolong that with that thing, but any questions by board members on host fees?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead, Mrs. Gorel.
As I'm looking through this, I see where the Winnebago County Health Department for the blight reduction, that they have cut that by $40,000. And yet they're going to be giving us board members $20,000 to go to our favorite groups that we might have to support, like non-for-profits. I would like to see that the blight go back to $100,000. We truly need to get rid of our blight. I would rather myself give up $2,000 of my share in order to get this to balance off. I just want to see that go up, and other board members should take a look at that. So we give up, $2,000 each, and we'll get that figure, I believe, back up to $100,000 where it belongs.
Thank you, Mrs. Gorel. Is there any clarification as to why 60,000? Was it an amended ask? Was it amended down? Was it amended down from what was requested by the health department, or was it a function?
Amended down.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there any rationale given in committee? I just want to clarify for the record.
We never actually amended it down. That was per our conversation when we met back in January. That's the numbers that were presented to us. I do believe, if I'm not mistaken, we didn't need as much towards that fund because we are being offset by actually state gives as well. I know Dr. Martell knows a bit more on that front. But I do believe that was originally what our conversation was back in January when we met, Mr. Chairman. There was no actual measure to say that we want to lower that amount. There was no discussion trying to lower it by any means.
It came that way. So Mr. Kelly, go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. Angie, I'm sorry, it's not 2,000 per board member. 20,000 divided by 20 board members is 1,000 apiece.
Thank you. I knew somebody would get me corrected because I'm not a numbers person. Thank you.
Okay, so Dr. Steve, was there anything you're going to add? I forget the nuance or history about the 60. I'm not seeing anything you wanted to add, or Dr. Martell?
Sure, I can add. I think last year, I believe the amount was 100,000. I don't know if, because normally what we did was match with the health department. I don't believe the health department spent that amount of money because they were receiving state grants for demolitions, things such as that. And I believe, I'd have to be corrected, but I believe they're still receiving some state grants in that. So therefore, the 60,000 is really a match to the health department. Their 60,000 that they budgeted also.
May I speak?
Yeah, Dr. Martell, go ahead.
Yes, Steve, that is not a match. We received the state grants and the Fed grants are for selected targeted zip codes. The 100,000 on the host fees was for use for zip codes for demolition in county areas that were not part of the targeted blight from either the Fed or the state.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Sandy, is there any reaction you have to 60 versus 100? I'm not going to speak for what the committee or board would or wouldn't consider, but just any reaction from what you assess on the use of that, I guess, $40,000 difference.
Well, as always, I mean, we know on average, the takedown of property is over 10,000 now. So when we asked for 100,000, that was 10 properties per year. That money is not going as far. So that certainly reduces the number of properties that can come down that are outside of the targeted areas.
Okay, thank you. And when you say targeted areas, refresh my memory. I'm foggy. I know we've talked about this a bunch of times. What areas are you creating capacity for with this particular effort? Oh, you there, Sandy?
Most of the districts that are targeted are in Ms. Red's and Dave Tassoni's areas. These are for all the areas that are not part of it. There's a complete list of zip codes and census tracts that are out there. So this is for pretty much everything that is not designated within those targeted areas, predominantly in Ms. Red's and Mr. Tassoni's districts.
Understood. Okay, thank you. Any other questions by board members? As it stands now, it's at 60. Any other board member comments, questions? Yes, Mr. Fellers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Martell, did the health department request 60,000? Did you request 100,000? Did you request more, or was no request made and we are just simply adjusting things as we go?
It would appear we had asked for 100,000 to really, at the estimate was for 10 additional properties per year outside of the targeted districts. Nobody communicated with me that there was going to be a reduction or what my need was going forward.
Thank you, Dr. Martell. And a follow-up, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Billich, you mentioned that, we are spending less on some of these host fee funds this year. Do you remember about how much less that was?
Off the top of my head, I don't, but I do believe it's north of 50,000. Like I said, with the money that we were allocated for the health department for the demolition of the properties within the rest of the county areas, there was no discussion about lowering it for any other reason aside from the fact that they get to it as soon as they can, and that's about it. There was no request for higher that was mentioned to me. There was no request for lower per se. It was something that was presented and the numbers were put together following what we had been doing with minor adjustments there along the way.
Great.
I'm more than open, and I would actually suggest to anyone, if they would like to adjust that, we can definitely motion that in to change that to 100,000.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, I would like to go ahead and make that motion on behalf of.
I have a
Ms.
question, please. I have a question.
Hold on.
Brad, I'll come back to you in 1 second. Mr. Fellers, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to move to amend that budget item to read 100,000 instead of 60,000.
So we have a motion by Mr. Fellers to amend the economic development action item to include 100,000 for the blight reduction efforts of the health department. And I see a hand up as a second by Mr. Girl. Now we have a motion to amend to 100,000. Mrs. Red, I'll go right to you.
Thank you, Chairman. This question is for Dr. Martell. I believe I had 2 houses on that list to be demolished. And I don't think they've been taken down yet. There are a lot of houses in the area, and I've sent notices. So I will be getting with you again next week, Dr. Martell, to see what we can do, because my area is really, really bad. Thank you.
Yeah, Sandy, did you want to respond real quick?
Correct. Obviously, there was a slowdown in some of it. We've been bidding out properties again as we come out of this, because typically we can't demo them in the winter because of the equipment comes out. So typically we start ramping up over the summer months. So Mrs. Red is correct. She has 2 properties coming down, at least on that list.
Okay, thank you. There'll be follow-up there. Mr. Billick.
I just had a quick question for Dr. Martell. Dr. Martell, for last year, we did do the 100,000. Did we use all those funds towards the demolition? Did we actually go through all the $100,000 worth of funds?
No.
Yeah.
Yes.
We have a rolling balance. So we go through the properties, we bid them out. For different community areas like South Beloit, we may actually combine funds and leverage them so we can take out in as many properties as we can in a block. So we typically work together and then we roll the funds. We have some projects that are still had to be seeded that could not be done until the spring again. So we are following up, but typically we're rolling on a constant basis through the year.
So if after this year you got 10,000 left over, roll into it'd just roll forward, and you could use it at some point early next year for.
Correct.
Yeah.
There were several properties that were well over 10,000. I think we took down one, had 5 different structures on it. It's well beyond $10,000 when you do that. In addition, it requires, obviously, both us and the city waive all of our, not the city, but we waive all of our fees, including building and zoning, for all of that, so that we can leverage every dollar we get to take down as many properties that need to come down.
Okay, thank you very much, Sandy. The motion is to increase the health department blight reduction effort from 60,000 to 100. That is the action you'll be voting on momentarily, Mr. Arena. Can I hear you? There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Martell, after we tear down these houses, what happens to the property? How does it go back into private ownership, and how long does that take?
Ms. Arena, it depends. If it's in private, again, we typically have to go through the court system to be able to go through the demo and the fast tracks, things like that, as you're well aware. Some of them we identify and we brought to the attention of the land bank if it's something that they be interested in terms of areas where we might have blocks, especially around things, areas. We know we've got an area called Prairie Road Pump that as we gain property there, the issue is that's on a community well, and we do not want to go forward and build on that or allow anyone else to build it, so that we bring it to the attention of the land bank, our representative.
Right, okay, but if the land bank doesn't take, I guess my question is, under this process, is there some scenario where the county is going to be assuming the obligation to maintain these properties for an extended period of time? If the land bank doesn't take it, does it become our responsibility to take care of it?
It is seeded and graded at the time of the demo. So at that particular moment, it depends, again, depends on where we're at in the process, and may lien may be placed on the property so that if it is sold, then the lien goes with it. But in terms of when you talk about maintenance, everything else is taken down. So it's pretty much maintenance free.
But we don't own it, right? That's, the county doesn't own the property. The prior owner still owns it. It's not necessarily our problem to take care of it, correct?
Go ahead, Sandy.
No, it's the computer here.
Oh, we had John, then you went off. Nope, still can't hear you. Sandy, I'll give you one last try here. I see you muted on your phone.
I didn't have anything else to add.
Oh, okay. Any other questions?
Well, just to finish my concern, so everyone's aware of it, as we move forward, we need to pay attention to what we're doing. And when we made this transition in the trustee program, we assumed obligation to maintain property. So we need to manage that financially and try to avoid ending up with a bunch of property that nobody else wants, that we have to continue to take care of year in and year out.
I would disagree with your assertion. We did not, as a county, the trust, the program itself is setting aside dollars for maintenance that it otherwise shipped out of town to an agent. And it's also capturing new revenue in the process that will be distributed to other taxing bodies. I don't know what we added to our liability as a county.
It's coming out of the program, the funds of the program, right? The tax dollars that we were recovering for other entities and for ourselves. So my point is, there's only so much money there. If we bankrupt the program with obligations to cut grass, we're defeating the purpose of the program.
Gotcha, thank you.
Okay.
The item before the board is.
May I say something, please?
Yeah, 1 second, Mrs. Gorel. The item before the board is to amend the health department item from $60,000 to $100,000. A yes would amend it up to $100,000. A no would keep it at the $60,000 threshold. Are there any other comments germane to this specific action of increasing? Oh, there you are. Mr. Webster, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm not sure if I ever heard a direct answer as to when it comes to the maintenance. In other words, the mowing that Paul has brought up. So once the property is graded and seeded, yes, hopefully comes up with a real beautiful lawn. We'll hope for that. But after that happens, then who is going to mow that? Because we have within our county and within our all of our villages, municipalities, and all that, they all have rules about how often something has to be mowed or maintained. And so I guess I was trying to get an understanding who is going to be responsible for mowing or maintaining that.
I think we're conflating items, but I'll go back to Sandy on this particular health department specific issue is what I thought I just heard was that the county does not own those properties. I would go back to Sandy to confirm that.
There's a lien put on the property of the property owner. I guess the question is, like, for any of us, we have to take it down for code violations. I mean, again, these become safety issues. You can't leave them up. I mean, here again, we're kind of conflating two issues here, which is the demolition. So we demo it, We put the lien on the property, the cost of the demo, the next person that purchases it, that lien comes on that. And again, it becomes part of that purchase price. But at the end of the day, regardless, the property has to be secured on the sites where it's unsafe.
So if I may ask a question, what I think I heard from Mr. Arena and from Mr. Webster is, so you demo a property and there's a year lag between that property being demoed and some type of formal action being taken, whether there's a lien or otherwise put on it over the demo. If it needs a couple of lawn mowings, who is responsible for that? The health department?
May I answer?
No, hold on, Mrs. Gorel. I'm just asking Sandy, who is responsible for that mowing? I think that gets at the heart of the question that Paul and Jim asked. Would that be the health department would then lien that, mow it, and then put an additional lien on a mowing lien? Or have you never run into there ever being a mowing need in this very limited number of times in a year, perhaps, where you're dealing with this?
So if it's a property that requires it, if it's out in the county, we might have to have Public Works do it, and then we put that charge on the lien as well.
Got it. Okay, thank you. I do know we got a couple more hands up. The specific thing and the motion is to increase it from 60,000 to 100 or not. A yes vote moves it up to 100,000. A no vote would leave it right at 60 as part of that package, I guess. Mrs. Gorel and then Mr. Kelly, specific to this amendment. Mrs. Gorel.
The only thing I was going to say, normally, when the complaints come in, the township will go out and take care of it. If the township that the property is in,
okay.
If it's not in, because we're only doing townships, and the township then will go out and mow it and then lien the property.
Thank you, Mrs. Gorel. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Chairman. I think this was supposed to be under the realm of our agreement with the Regional Planning Council, our R1BC or whatever.
We've not had that be an issue at this point. I'll double check on that, but I do not believe that was the case. So again, we're talking about at this point, if we use the rough estimates that Sandy gave us that were 10,000 a property, we're going to knock down about six homes with how it's currently listed. If you increase it to 100,000, that would get us up to closer to an average year, 10 homes. So that is the question. Any other questions for board members? Mr. Hoffman.
Thank you, Chairman. I got lost in the beginning of this. I thought Ms. Gorel brought up the money that we were normally allotted to bring back to our districts. Did I hear that right?
That $1,000 board member, which is not before the board right now.
Okay, so that's not part of what we're voting on right now. Thank
Correct.
you, Chairman.
Yep, that's already done. An action item that is already something you can access through the board office. So again, any other questions on this specific amendment? Okay, seeing none. Are there any board members who are opposed to increasing the 60,000 to 100,000? Please show your hand. I see at this point, Mr. Schultz is a no vote, Mr. Arena is a no vote, Mr. Butita, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Webster are all no votes. Are there any other no votes?
Roll call, Mr. Chairman.
We will go ahead and roll call that. Clerk Gamow, go ahead. A yes vote moves it to 100. A no vote keeps it at 60. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a vote for the amendment. We will start with Mrs. Gorel.
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman.
Yes.
Mr. Kelly.
No.
Mr. McDonald.
No.
Mr. Neighbors.
Yes.
Mrs. Red.
Yes.
Mr. Salgado.
Yes.
Mr. Schultz.
No.
Mr. Tassoni.
Yes.
Mr. Webster.
No.
Mr. Westcott.
Yes.
Mr. Arena.
No.
Mr. Billich,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Butita,
No.
Mrs. Crosby, do we have Mrs. Crosby?
No.
Mr. Fellers,
Yes.
Mr. Fiducia,
No.
Mr. Girl.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, that is 11 yes, 8 no on the amendment.
Okay, we have amended up from 60,000 to 100,000, the dollars for the Health Department Blight Reduction Initiative regarding property demolition. So the package is still together, all of the items with the one amended change, which includes the 100,000 for the Health Department demo. Any other questions on the amended item, the amended package? Yes, sir, Mr. Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You've heard me say repeatedly over the years that I think that we spend host fee monies like Santa Claus at Christmas when we have other more pressing demands and needs. And if we had the option of reducing some of the other items and increasing the blight reduction, that's something that I actually think is a good use of our money. But we're not making hard decisions about dollars that are in front of us now. And this decision reflects that, in my humble opinion. And it concerns me about the pattern that we're setting in terms of future hard decisions that we have to make. Thank you.
Thank you. I do see a couple of hands up. I'll go to Mr. Billick as the committee chair first, and then I'll go to Mr. McDonald, if that's okay, Mr. Billick.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In regards to what Steve just said, Steve, I mean, you're a very observant man in the regards to that and the spending. From my understanding, when I did ask a question about a few of these other programs, they're programs that we had been giving to for years. I do understand that actually some of them had also went down. We have had requests from Severson Dells as well as from Keep Northern Illinois Beautiful to go back to the amount that we actually originally were giving them the first time that they actually asked for this annual give. And their amount was lowered. We had a great conversation on the committee floor in a discussion in regards to the fact that the benefits of what they're doing for us and the amount of money that they're saving us through Keep Northern Illinois Beautiful and everything that Severson Dells is doing for school programs and so on. Those are actually likely that we should definitely go back up in those amounts. I wanted to make it, I didn't want to have a whole discussion during everything that happened with coronavirus, all the funding that we were worried about. I didn't want to create a giant storm around just this annual host fee gives. Obviously, we prepared this list earlier in the year. I was obviously going to bring it up about possibly raising some of those amounts, but I also stayed away from that. The committee did discuss at length, though, in regards to certain other ones going up. I will tell you this, though, in regards to the host fee funds, everyone has been very frugal. These are annual gives that we would have been a part of and gave out of our general fund in regards to some of them, like the NIU extension and so on and so forth, which actually most communities aren't giving from host fee funds. They're actually giving it out of their general fund to be a part of and have these kind of programs. Luckily for us, on some of these programs, we actually also give them less than what our other community partners do. So I just want to make that clarification.
Thank you. Any other comments? Oh, Mr. McDonald. Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The question I have is Dr. Martell alluded to the fact that occasionally these liens are paid off. I'm curious, where do the funds go? Do they go back to the health department? Do they return to the host fee? Is this something that maybe we could look at spending less and less and roll those dollars into the same account for the purpose of demolition, where our out-of-pocket cost had already been spent and we just roll it over?
I do not believe lien dollars go back into the host fee, but I'll defer to Steve or Sandy on that. I'm sure that's never happened before. Steve, anything you got on that, or Sandy?
I'm not aware. I know we had some mowing liens, things like that, that we receive when properties are sold, that money goes back to the general fund. But I'm not aware of, any large purchases that where the money would come back to the host fee. I just doesn't happen.
Correct. Okay. Thank you. The fair point on that. Any other questions, comments before we vote? As it stands right now is we're looking at this entire resolution as one package. That's what's before the board. It is amended to reflect $100,000. And with that, are there any board members who are opposed to this motion? I see Mr. Schultz's hand up. I do not see or hear any other hands up at this time. So I'm going to, I do see Mr. Webster popped in there with a no vote. So I got Mr. Webster, Mr. Schultz are no votes. I'm going to cast a yes vote for all other members present at this time, and motion passes with two no votes. Thank you very much, Mr. Billick. Oop, you're muted.
That concludes our report. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, sir. Next item of business after economic development is operations. Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Operations Committee's got an ordinance amending Chapter 50 of the Winnebago County Codes of Ordinances related to food establishment operations during the COVID-19 pandemic to be laid over.
Okay, thank you. It has been read in. Thank you very much. Any other items out of Operations Committee?
Yes, Chairman. The Operations Committee has stood up a subcommittee under housing. Mr. Arena is going to chair that committee. Hopefully this is okay. He's told me that Mr. Schultz and Mrs. Red have showed interest in being in that committee. The purpose of the committee is to communicate with our land bank representative and to work with our agent on issues related to the trustee program. So keep your eyes on next week's committee agenda. Possibly get a hold of Mr. Arena if if this is an area that interests you, and we'll move forward.
Can I just ask questions? Do we want to formally establish? We continue to add ad hoc committees, and this one sounds like it may be more permanent in nature. Do we want to formally establish it through the board so it reflects the will of the board? That's just a question I would just throw out there. We don't need to conclude it now. Two, I'd be curious to see how it intersects and synergizes versus competes with things that I'm working directly, not so much with the land bank, but with the trustee program, because that obviously touches housing. So I'd be curious so that we don't run into another duplication of efforts. If it's just a way to basically, I would be concerned if the agent is getting conflicting directives. So I'd be curious on the intent of that in future discussions. But I guess the first question is on a follow-up down the road, do you want to formally establish a housing committee? Because housing and housing stock and all that this could be is certainly not an item that goes away the way that a county administrator search is more short-term in nature.
Sure, I agree with that.
Just my 2 cents.
Sure, I did check with the state's attorney's office as far as the recommendation, the best way to start this. Maybe we look at making a more permanent committee later, but the recommendation for now was to declare the fact that we're starting a subcommittee.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Salgado, then Mr. Arena.
Yes, on that same topic, have we gotten a report from our liaison on the land bank at all? You know, I don't know if there has been any meetings or anything like that, but you know, I think this is where kind of the conversation has spurred up a little bit, is that communication with our liaison and, you know, working together on the housing issues potentially with the land bank and the trustee program as well. So, you know, I just would like to know if we've gotten a report from our liaison that was appointed to the land bank.
I have not seen anything recently. I think it has been slow with everything going on, but I would say we have not asked him for an update. We've not invited him to a committee for an update, which is, I guess, something that always can happen. We have not done that. The trustee program just finished a cycle. I think there's some very good news that the numbers I heard initially that should be reported out here in the next 24 hours affirmed the decision to fire our agent that we had for a very long time and to make the change to a local solution. I think people are going to be very happy with that. I think it affirms that the board's decision was the right one at the end of the day. So that one, there'll be some good news coming on that. And I think there's a lot of good discussions there, Mr. Salgado.
Yeah, so I just request Mr. McDonald, if you could touch base on your next operations, follow up with those two things and just have that information and whatever you want to do. I think it's a good opportunity to get some, doesn't have to be set aside right now or whatever, but I think it's good communication to be through. So thank you.
Yes, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to Mr. Delgado's point, we did try this roughly a year ago when we went to the land bank. We talked about it. Back when we met together, I spoke about it when I stood up in front to give the committee report asking for volunteers back then. It has taken this long to start getting some traction, but this isn't something new from this week or last. This is something that Mr. Arena has and the operations committee has been working on for quite some time now.
Got it. Thank you very much. Any other questions or discussion? Seeing none, Public Works Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have no report. I anticipate our next Public Works meeting to be on Zoom Tuesday, June 16th.
Thank you very much, sir. Public Safety Committee, Mr. Booker.
Thank you, Chairman. Public Safety Committee brings forward one item, resolution extending proclamation declaring the County of Winnebago, Illinois disaster area for the coronavirus response. This is the third extension, and I so move.
Got a motion by Mr. Booker on the disaster proclamation extension, which is our third. Second by Mrs. Crosby and Mr. Fellers. Item is now before the board. I know there was a lot of discussion on this. What was the time frame again, just so I'm clear on what came out of committee? What was the day amount?
It was a 30-day extension. There was talk of a 14-day, but it's a 30-day.
It's at 30 right now. Okay, thank you. Just want to confirm because I know that went back and forth. Steve?
Isn't it 45-day?
Actually, it's 45 days, please.
Okay, so we'll clarify the record. This is a 45-day extension as it stands right now. Okay, thank you. Sorry if I was on, I got that wrong on the record there. 45-day extension. Any discussion? Yes, sir, Mr. Arena.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I don't have the paperwork in front of me. It would expire on what date? Mr. Chapman, do you know?
July 29th.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other discussion on this 45-day disaster declaration extension? Yes, a follow-up, Mr. Arena.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Chairman Haney, we're talking about to the end of July. In committee, I think you mentioned we don't have any more, we have sufficient personal protection equipment to last through that period of time. What else might we spend money on between now and the end of July?
I don't know, and I think actually that information is now dated. That could be shifting as well on the PPE. That was information I shared at the time. Of course, believed it to be true, but I've heard since there may be some additional need at PPE that pops up because there's so many dynamic pieces to that. So I could not give you a full scope. What we can do is provide, if we put it on the board and or finance committee agenda, we can report as we go over this 45-day period. If there's anything that is big and staggering and out of the ordinary, that would really bump things up a great deal, we can pre-communicate that as we're doing it prior to doing that. And I do know Steve and Ann are in regular communication on some of the logistical stuff as well. So I guess I don't know what I don't know. I don't want to overstate something. There is some activity on PPE, I guess, after there was a little lull, and it's variable. And I'm not trying to dodge the question. It's just, it comes at you in spurts. And that's what I know to be true at this time.
But to follow up, we're not 100% certain that we're going to recoup all of the money we're spending, correct?
I I couldn't guarantee that you would. I believe that we will get a lion's share of the dollars reimbursed. Yes, I do at this time.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Steve, is there anything that's that you want to add to that or need to clarify or add to?
Well, the EOC is still open. It's open 3 days a week. There's still individuals operating out of that as far as some of the logistics, some of the other areas that they've been doing work on as far as food distribution, things such as that. But they have wound down. Obviously, they're concerned about if there is additional cases being reported, especially in the congregate settings, the nursing homes and that. The state has really ran the testing that's required in the nursing homes because they still feel that that's a big area of concern for the community.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Steve. Mr. Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question for Mr. Chapman. We've seen reports at the Finance Committee about expenditures on the PPE, but I've also heard conversation that, well, we have other items that we're accumulating that we're going to be submitting for. And so I'm curious about what those are and if we have any estimate of that. And then related, the EOC being open, the operating expenses related to that specifically, is that a county expense?
Steve. Oh, we can't hear you, Steve. Go ahead, Steve.
The individual that is responsible for the operation of the EOC, previously that was a county employee that worked for the sheriff. I believe about a year ago, the county board decided to function that out to the Rockford Fire Department. They actually hired this individual and the county pays their particular salary. There's other costs relating to phones, other miscellaneous costs that are incurred in the EOC that the county is paid for. I believe when Ann gave her reports and that, I think on the bottom of the report, she indicated other costs that were part of the EOC in addition to the PPE. So we can get you the latest updated report that reflects both of those items.
The sunk cost of the EOC existing is budgeted. It is specific to this COVID response where we're going to see reimbursement. I think everybody knows that, of course. Any other questions, comments on this item? Yes, sir, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do we have key metrics or what are we measuring to know that we need to continually operate in a state of emergency? Or when will this become something that's not going away, but something we're likely to be dealing with for quite some time?
Key metrics, I guess if I'm just shooting from the hip, is a vaccine moving to stage 5 would be obvious things. We're going to be dealing with COVID for some time. I know the start of the school year is going to be a time of great importance and how that affects things. The idea of a second wave with reopening now and also issues with obviously concerns of a spike in the fall. All I know is I saw a report yesterday where they're anticipating 100,000 more deaths across the country, which would double our number. I don't know. I'm not trying to play coy. I don't think anybody knows. What I would say, and me and you have talked about this and agree, is the box we're in is no matter how much we're opening up, we still want to be able to be in a position to capture costs that are associated with the COVID response, even as we open up. So it's us being open in the EOC, us being in a position to capture reimbursement dollars from IEMA or FEMA doesn't mean we're not positioning ourselves to open up further. The test positivity rate is as low as it's ever been, at least from the reporting out that's been daily from the health department. Our hospital capacity continues to have plenty of capacity. Those are the key metrics that keep us moving along. There are some states that opened up before us that are seeing upticks in cases. It's all like smushed. It's all almost running together. You see some things that look great, some things that look bad, or at least indicate this is gonna be with us for a while. And I don't know. I don't know, and I feel like I don't want to commit to something and then look like we're trying to fib with you, because we're not. Mr. Fellers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to echo that. I think, what's prudent here is that we continue to be careful, as Mr. Haney alluded to. There are 10 states, actually 21 states, who have now seen a resurgence in cases, including states like Texas, who was one of the first to reopen. They have a 53% increase in the 14-day trend of COVID cases, and their ICU availability across the state has fallen to 33%. States like Arizona, that also opened early, have now seen a 211% increase in their 14-day trend, right? And now only 28% of their ICU beds are available. I think that we have a state have done in a region have done quite well, and that our numbers are showing that. But I think it also goes to show that this can, states that were at one point looking like they were on the down and had flattened the curve, and the curve was actually dropping down, are now seeing significant spikes again. And we need to continue to make the prudent choice, which is to continue to be cautious and to be careful and make sure that we have all of the pieces in place and everything that we need should our numbers start to look like those 21 other states.
Thank you. Yes, sir, Mr. Booker.
Thank you, Chairman. Getting back to the EOC, the IEMA pretty much dictates when we open and when we close our EOCs across the state. But as long as IEMA is continuing the operations of our countywide EOCs, that we need to take advantage, and just as long as the taxpayers aren't taking a hook for operations. I mean, Ann Johns and Steve Chapman could be called in on a Saturday and Sunday. God forbid it would ever happen. But the logistics, paperwork, logs and stuff like that. I just want to make sure that our taxpayers, that the county taxpayers, aren't on the hook for that, and we need to take advantage of any reimbursement possibilities there are that we need to take advantage of. So as long as IEMA is in operation, we should keep our EOC in operation, and we should maintain our declaration until IEMA says that we can close them up. Spikes in cases, that doesn't hit me. Like if we see a spike in deaths, that would be alarming to me. But spikes in cases, especially when the recoveries far outnumber the deaths. Yeah, I look forward to getting the reimbursements from state and federal as long as we can. Thank you.
Thank you. The item is the extension of the declaration for 45 days. That's the specific item before the board. Any other specific questions or comments on that item? Okay, I don't see any. Thank you for the discussion. Are there any board members who are opposed to extending the declaration 45 days? Please indicate. Show your hand, yell. I do not hear any objection, so we're going to cast a yes vote for all members present. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Let's see here. Back to Mr. Booker. Anything else, Mr. Booker?
Yes, I just want to add that for those that didn't see the article in today's Register Star, I just want to thank the board for the passage of that, the body cams, tasers, and squad car cams back in November. This is a good example of why this thing was needed, why that package was needed. And it sounds like the end of training will be tomorrow, I believe. They should be wrapping up the training, but cameras are already on the officers on the road. Cameras are already in the squad cars. The tasers, the new tasers have already been deployed with the officers. So it's all a good thing. State's Attorney's Office is very happy, and it's a good thing. It'll save us a lot of litigation later on. As far as the jail goes, there's still only one COVID case that I'm aware of, and there are no COVID cases at the juvenile detention facility. And Mr. Vedra advises that they're averaging between 28 and 31 juveniles at the Juvenile Detention Center. That concludes my report. Thank you.
Just on the public safety side, obviously there's a lot going on with protests. Mr. Kelly, I'm coming right to you in 1 second. I want to thank the sheriff and Chief Saganek. I've had several hours of conversation bugging them about a whole range of issues from policy to what's going on with protest updates, and really appreciate their responsiveness. One thing I'd point you to that I didn't know is, and it'd be a great discussion for public safety, is the CALIA reaccreditation process the sheriff goes through. Something that was out of my kind of ballywick, but drilling down, that's where they review a lot of like use of force policies. There's 400 different metrics. I mean, it's actually the gold standard of the industry, and fascinating since there's so much national conversation on that. Maybe it'd be a great topic down the road for your committee. Don't want to belabor it now, but just wanted to say there's a bunch of people in that department giving me their time with questions I'm getting from community members that are obviously real time with everything going on, and with a host of protests that are coming up over the next week. It'll be an ongoing discussion. Mr. Fellers, did you have your hand up, sir? Oh, no, I'm sorry, Mr. Kelly. I skipped Mr. Kelly. You're first, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks to your comments, I've now forgotten what I wanted to say.
Sorry about that. I'm going to come back to you if you need to, Mr. Fellers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I noticed that Chief Deputy Saganek is here. I just had a question for you. One of the public speakers at the beginning of the meeting today asked about sheriff's deputies guarding or protecting private business during one of the protests. I was just hoping that you could comment on that, if A, what that was the case, and B, where that would come from.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Mr. Fellows. Could you? I didn't hear the comment you're referring to. Could you just?
Yeah, the comment was that there were sheriff deputies guarding a private business during one of the protests. I believe the complaint was also that there were Rockford police there as well. I'm trying to understand what sort of process or steps would lead to a sheriff's deputy guarding a private business during a protest, or any sort of private property.
I'm not aware of which business you're referring to. If you could be more specific, I'd be happy to answer the question. But I'm not aware. We were not guarding private property, but we were at times making sure that that the peace was kept.
Sure.
Are you referring to Murphy?
The protester specifically mentioned Murphy's Pub. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, at that time, we ourselves and the Rockford police were there keeping the peace. I don't know that we're guarding Murphy's per se. It was just a matter of keeping the peace between potentially the private security that Murphy's had and the protesters.
Were there other private businesses that the sheriff's deputies were keeping the peace in front of during that time?
In general, the sheriff's deputy and the city police, the state police, the Park District Police, the Lowe's Park Police, we're all working together just to keep the peace for any business. There's been over the past week, there's been a couple instances where there was some damage done to businesses, and in those cases, our officers stepped up and again would made arrests when appropriate and kept the peace to avoid that kind of damage or any other kind of fighting or conflict.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Chief Deputy. Just one quick follow-up on another item. I appreciate the press release in the conversation that we had via email earlier this week. Obviously, it sounds like the training for the body cameras for the corrections officers is almost complete, and those will be implemented soon. What is the current state of, are there other security cameras that are currently in the jail that monitor the pods and monitor what's going on?
So there is, I think there's 2 cameras per pod. The camera system in the jail is old. It's it's almost an outdated end of life type system. There are blind spots in the cameras. They don't cover the entire area. So like in this case, the body cameras will cover just about any incident that would occur.
Sure. Appreciate that. I bring this up because I've had a number of my constituents reach out to me and ask that some of that footage, potentially be released, just to given the tension going on with everyone, that if things were all, done on the level that, that the sheriff's department and the jail could just sort of ease everyone's mind, that things were done by the book, and that, everything is on the up.
Sure, I understand the concerns here. At the same time, there are some potential security concerns with releasing video from the jail. We are currently discussing with our attorneys whether the the releasing it to the public outweighs the potential security risks of the jail. I will tell you this though, that either way, any board member, including yourself, is welcome to come review the video. Again, there's the officers did nothing wrong, so there's really nothing. There's absolutely nothing to hide.
Sure.
Again, it's a matter of security for the jail, for the inmates, and for the staff. So,
Sure, and I really do appreciate that offer. I think where everyone's just trying to make sure that we keep tensions at an even point, and everyone in a peaceful environment as much as possible. And I will certainly take you up on that offer. So thank you very much.
Absolutely, thank you.
Mr. Billick had his hand up. Mr. Billick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to direct this towards Mr. Fellers. In regards to the question that you asked, I do want to give a huge thank you to all of our local law enforcement. In regards to the Murphy's comment, I try to stay away from commenting too much, but I'll make this brief. I've dealt with over 120 saved threats. That was actually just in the last few days. We've been getting threats of having our establishment burned down for weeks now. Actually, it was also included were 3 other establishments that are along the Perryville corridor. And these are actually serious threats. We've actually had to deter multiple vehicles that were trying to pull onto our property overnight. This is before this weekend situation that you mentioned as well. Our security team has actually worked very closely with local law enforcement, including state police as well. And we were able to actually catch people that were in the process of converting or transferring packages and looting and so on and so forth. I want to commend the police department on that. In regards to the comment, Mr. Fellers, you are welcome to actually discuss with me at any given point in time. I've already released our statement to the Rockford Register in that regard as well. We've also teamed up with an activism group that's actually going to be meeting on Sunday, which I implore you to show up as well, which actually were there as well. And they are well aware of everything that was going on and all the threats that were made on our establishment. And now it's an activism group to bring all the voices and make sure that it's heard in the proper way and in a peaceful manner. We bear no ill will towards the message nor to any of the protesters. But I will say this, Mr. Fellers, if you would like to know the heartache and the disheartening situation of what's happening with some of these small businesses here, feel free to contact me, sir. And Mr. Taganik, thank you for everything that your law enforcement division, as well as the Rockford Police Department, State Police Department, and the Park District Police Department, who has also actually checked in with us to make sure that we're doing okay. I want to thank all of you for everything that you do. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. We're happy to serve the community.
Thank you very much, Mr. Billick. Any other comments? Seeing none. Anything else, Mr. Booker?
I have a comment.
Oh, yes.
I have a question.
Yes, sir. Mr. Neighbors.
Yes. I was wondering what is the sheriff's department what is the sheriff's department doing to help reorganize some of the policies and the rules that help keep the officers accountable, because the cameras do anything will just only prove that the officers did what the guidelines or what they were trained to do. But some of the issues of what they're trained to do, some of the issues is what they're trained to do. Instead of going in trying to de-escalate the situation first, they go in with tactical training first. And I was wondering if any of those policies or changes are being looked at.
Yeah, I would answer this very quickly, and then I would say this is part of a larger discussion that needs to probably occur. It is important. It is timely. We do not want to defer this at all, but if we could get that on a public safety agenda or even a board agenda, so it's planned out. The reason is this: I've had 2 hours of discussion with Chief Saganek just in the last week. It is a whole lot of stuff. And I fear that if I gave the chief the floor, he'd give you a 1-minute answer and it would be incomplete. I think there would be a lot of follow-up questions appropriately, of course. Would it be okay, and I don't want to disrespect this important discussion, could we get a public safety meeting and with that as a focus, and anybody on the board and everybody on the board that wants to really focus on that? This is a 20 question follow-up. It merits the respect and that level of depth. And I think short of that, we're going to look like we're skirting around a very complex discussion. And that's my initial reaction. Would that be okay with everybody, and Mr. Neighbors specifically?
Yes.
So that we do this right. And I think if we don't do it right, we're going to look like we're not taking it seriously. And I think everybody that I've heard from on the board, and everybody I know on this board is taking this very seriously as well. So let's do that. I see Mr. Booker shaking his head up and down. I think that's an affirmative that he would work to do that as soon as it's possible to do so, because it merits great discussion and from a lot of perspectives. Is there anything else on this? Anything else real quick on public safety? Okay, thank you very much. Personnel Policy Committee, Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe everybody received the 3 resumes per email. At this time, I'd like to defer to Mr. Arena, reference the 3 resumes, and also defer to Mr. Arena and Mr. Chapman on how we're going to complete these interviews for these 3 subjects. So if I could defer to Mr. Arena.
Thank you, Mr. Fiducia. Mr. Arena, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For clarification, I believe Mr. Fiducia is referring to, there were 3 candidate profiles that were sent to me and possibly Mr. Chapman also with other information. And when I was looking at the board packet for tonight, I didn't see those included. So Chairman Haney, I don't know if you had seen that yet or not. It's just without identifying the individuals who applied for the administrator position, it describes their credentials for the 3 people. But as far as the process goes, we have personnel policy does have a resolution before the board tonight that came through the ad hoc committee that defines the procedure that we're going to go with to interview these candidates, and it has the schedule of how those interviews are going to take place, along with how the board and the other county electeds and county the department heads will engage the candidates and create an evaluation for us to consider.
So let's do this, to your very good point. There's 2 items. One, we're going to make sure all board members get those 3 candidate profiles minus their names, that overview. We'll make sure that everybody has it if they don't already. We might even send it out a second time if it was already sent once. 2, what is before the board tonight is the resolution setting forth procedures to Mr. Arena's point for selection of the administrator. That way the plan to select the final candidate that would be extended and negotiated an offer and then would come to the board. We'd know what the process is before you engage in it. That's the item of action tonight. So we'll get you an email with the 3 profiles ASAP. I'll ask Steve to work with Paul and get that out maybe tomorrow, if not Monday first thing, so you can review that. You won't see names, you'll see kind of strengths in that. 2, Mr. Fiducia, I assume this is that you would entertain a motion.
I would like to so move the ad hoc committee's recommendations. And before I do that, I believe on those correspondence I got, they were marked confidential. So anybody that on the board that does receive them, I would really ask to make sure that we keep, even though there's no names on there, keep that confidential. So I would like to so move the ad hoc committee's recommendation.
I'd like to second that motion.
Yes, sir. Resolution by Mr. Fiducia setting forth procedures for the selection of the county administrator, second by Mr. Webster. Thank you, Mr. Webster. Any discussion on this resolution? Any comments, any reactions? I do not see any hands up or any questions at this point. With that, are there any board members who are opposed to this resolution? I do not see any objection, so we're going to cast a yes vote for all members present. And motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. And then I'm just going to ask Steve to coordinate with Mr. Fiducia, Mr. Rena, to make sure whatever should be sent to the whole group is appropriate for a 20-person email, and they'll make the right appropriate decision for confidentiality and all that. That way nothing gets out that shouldn't, or conversely, nothing gets not sent that should be sent. So we'll make sure that gets done right. We've passed the resolution. Any other, Mr. Fiducia, is there anything else from your committee?
Yeah, I was just wondering on my own, how soon do you think we're going to be able to be live here? Because I think that this is something that's important, that when we do talk to these people, that we at least have some interaction with them. So is there anything, Mr. Chairman, on how soon we're going to be able to begin to have in-person committee meetings and whatnot? So that's just a question.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think what we talked about, now the last I heard Steve weigh in his thoughts, and Shar from legal, and I think Sean from maintenance, was committees coming up here pretty quick where we could start to have committee meetings back together, with the idea the board meetings would follow in short order, as fast as we can. A little bit of back and forth and a little bit of misalignment around when to do the board meeting, but there's pretty good alignment with everybody, including board members, on getting committee work back together. So in the next cycle, I think was the plan initially. Steve, has there been any variance to the idea that the next round of committees would be in person?
No, we haven't actually determined what committees will be meeting next week and so on. We just have to make sure that room 303 is available for the committee meetings, because that's probably the room that would best suit the social distancing and so on. So, but I think that would be, we could go forward with that.
Yeah, I don't think it would make sense to meet in 510 very much, unless it's a 2 or 3 person side meeting or something. But yeah, I agree. So we'll clarify that. Yes, Mr. McDonald had his hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a Republican caucus, we had this conversation, and as of right now, we're intending on meeting in person for the next caucus. I did call Mr. Hoffman today. Traditionally, they've used 303, so I don't want to take that away from him if they intend on using 303. But if they're not going to be there, the Republican caucus will likely meet there. If they are, I don't know if we could talk to allowing us to use the jury room or another large room somewhere that we could all meet in person and observe the distancing.
Yep. We'll work with you on that after you talk to Mr. Hoffman offline. And one way or the other, if you guys are meeting simultaneously, we'll make sure you have plenty of space. The concern I would have is if we have a larger group meeting in 510 and, everybody's on top of each other, and then it looks like the board's not adhering to something we're asking the community to, and then there'd be undue, there would be natural public criticism. And I just hate to put the board in that spot, but we'll definitely, how about if you and Mr. Hoffman talk offline, and then with Steve, myself, and we'll make sure you guys are happy on stuff going forward for sure. Mr. Hoffman?
Yes. Everybody is breaking up.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hoffman?
I just wanted to pass on to my caucus.
Yeah, Mr. Hoffman, we can hear you, man.
Wouldn't mind if you guys call me to give me your thoughts on whether you want to meet in person or have another Zoom meeting.
Mr. Hoffman, we're not laughing
Can I break up?
We're laughing with you. It's hard to hear you right now, but your Democrat members will be calling you, I think was what you wanted.
Sure you are.
Reach out to Mr. Hoffman.
Yeah.
Okay, we can't hear you very well, sir, so we'll move on, but I think
that's what I wanted.
The Dems are going to reach out to Mr. Hoffman about next steps, and we'll move on from there because we can't hear you very well. Anything else under personnel policy?
No, Mr. Chairman, that concludes my report. And thank you for that information.
Yep, thank you. Anything under new business? Okay, with that, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion, Mr. Feller, second, Mr. Salgado. Are there any board members opposed to this motion? Hearing none.
Mr. Chairman,
Oh, Mrs. Red.
I'm sorry, it's sort of hard to unmute.
No, go ahead. You have the floor.
I don't know if it's a question or a comment, but it's for Dr. Martell. I thought I heard her say in a committee meeting that they gave some mass to a synagogue. Is she still there? No.
Yes, I am, Mrs. Rudd. I'm not, we gave masks to a synagogue?
Did you give mass to anyone?
No.
An organization. I thought I heard that in a committee meeting.
Not the PPE at the health department. All of our personal protective equipment, what we call that's stored as part of the public health preparedness, was turned over to the Emergency Operations Center.
Okay.
Typically, those kinds of PPE are, again, for clarification, then are distributed to first responders. They're given to the, what I'm going to say, the nursing homes and congregate living settings like milestones and stepping stones for the caregivers and the residents. I'm not aware that they were given out to anything else beyond that, but that would be through the EOC.
I thought I heard a synagogue that received some, so that was my question. Well, did you give any of those masks to a synagogue?
The health department does not have the personal protective equipment. That is operated through the Emergency Operations Center through the logistics section.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Red. Thank you, Sandy. With that, we have a motion and a second to adjourn. Are there any board members opposed to the motion to adjourn? Seeing none, we've adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.